What's up, y'all? Hey, the correct answer to that question, just across the board, Muppet Christmas Carol, obviously. Best Christmas movie ever. We love it. My wife doesn't like it, but she watches it because she loves me. We moved here, my wife and I, 3 days after we got married. We were in Michigan, and we got in a U-Haul 3 days after. We just moved here cold. We didn't know anybody. We just decided to move across the country. And you wouldn't expect that just moving from state to state, there'd be some culture shock moments for us. But we had to go through some culture shifts. I showed up here calling soda pop. That's what I called it, pop, and everybody made fun of me. I had to change it. I used to call Prescott. That's what people did. But probably the biggest culture shock moment for me was we moved out here. And in order for this to make any sense, you need to understand where I was from in Michigan. I grew up in Big Rapids, Michigan, which probably like Apache Junction, not super cool. Sorry, Apache Junction, if you're here, but it's just not the best. My wife, however, she's from Holland, Michigan, which is like Fountain Hills. It's like the nice part of Michigan. It's right on the water. It's right on Lake Michigan, best ocean in the world. Lake Michigan, just beautiful beach right there. And I needed to impress my wife, who grew up in Holland, and so what I decided that I needed to become a boatman. Let me explain what a boatman is. It's very important to know this. A boatman is someone who at any second looks like they could be getting on a yacht. Now granted, I don't have a yacht, my wife didn't have a yacht, but I dressed the part. I would rock a nice, clean, usually light blue polo, because it works with my eyes nicely. Light blue polo, and I would rock very shorter than helpful khaki shorts, that was the look. And the main thing that you would wear, this is very important to be a boatman, is that you would wear, they're called Sperry's. Anybody wear Sperry's anymore? Probably not. Sperry's, trust me, in Holland, Michigan, cool. And so I bought these Sperry's, no socks, you never wear socks, and I dressed this way to impress my wife because she wanted to fall in love with a boatman. So this is how I've dressed. And we came out here, and my wife, she was a school teacher, and she was invited by some of her friends that she works with. She was invited to this place called the Buffalo Chip. Yeah, sweet, Buffalo Chip in Cave Creek. And listen, I did not know this. The Buffalo Chip is like the wild, wild west. There's cattle there. People are riding bulls. It's cowboy town. And I was not prepared for cowboy town. And so my wife goes to this place and she's watching bull riding and she didn't tell me there was anything happening there. She calls me, Jake, come to this thing, it's fun. And so I remember putting on my best boatman attire and I put on my polo and my khaki shorts and my Sperry's, and I got in my little light blue Volkswagen Jetta, meow. And I drove out to Cave Creek to go to the Buffalo Chip. And I remember pulling in and parking, and then I remember this Ford F-750 truck, right next to me, and the guy got out of it, and he had actual spurs on his boot, he's a real cowboy. And I walked into a Clint Eastwood movie. It was out of control, and I was prepared to simply just be a boatman. I've never felt so out of place. I didn't want to make eye contact with anybody. I instantly became a little tiny little child, and I just walked like this back to find my wife, and I sat by her. And this series, When in Rome, the premise is this. The premise is how do we as Christ followers stand out in a place where we just seem so incredibly different than everybody else? How does someone rocking boatman attire go into the Buffalo Chip and make an impact? And so I'll just be really clear, this series, as straightforward as any series, is for those of us intentionally that have already raised their hand to say, yes, I'm following Jesus. This is for you. This is for you to process. We say all the time in our student ministry, be a Christ-centered difference maker. This series is about how to actually make a difference. And it's called When in Rome because it's a catchy thing. People say when in Rome, you change to fit in. But it's also called When in Rome because we're going through the book of 1 Peter. 1 Peter was written by a dude named Peter, and it was written to the Christians in Rome, ancient Rome. And if you sometimes think that being a Christian is hard in 2023 America, just go back in time and live in ancient Rome. The reality is this, it's the easiest place to be a Christian. America right now, compared to literally any other place in the world, it could not be any easier for you to follow Jesus. Our life is not hard. We are not being persecuted. But the Christians in Rome were. And they were dealing with hard things and difficult things. And Peter is writing this letter to them, encouraging them, challenging them to be more like Jesus in a world that seems to reject them. And we're living in this book to try to be encouraged, to try to process how we as Christ followers can make it different in a world that sometimes feels like Rome, in a world that seems like we don't fit in. And so that's what we're doing. I'm gonna jump right in. I love this. This is in 1 Peter, this is in chapter 2, verse 19. It says this, "For it is commendable if someone bears up under the pain of unjust suffering because they are conscious of God. For it is commendable if someone bears up under the pain of unjust suffering." I'm just gonna get right to it. The main point of the day is this: when in Rome, if you wanna make a difference for Jesus, you need to suffer well. You need to suffer well. Thanks, Jake. This seems like a downer. Don't blame me, blame Peter and Jesus. So this is what we're talking about. And to be honest, this hits me a little bit because oftentimes when I'm in a place that feels like it rejects me, my answer is I wanna fight back. I wanna take out a weapon, take out a sword, like fisticuffs, and I wanna show people that I'm right. I wanna win. And Peter is encouraging these Christians in the opposite way, saying if you wanna make a difference, maybe think about the way that you endure, think about the way that you suffer. And we're gonna talk today about, we're gonna talk about how to suffer well. I'm gonna give you 3 things that I think would help us as Christ followers suffer well. And the first thing is this: if you wanna suffer well, you first have to understand it. Understand what it means to suffer. Peter says this, "But how is it to your credit if you receive a beating for doing wrong and endure it? But if you suffer for doing good and you endure it, this is commendable before God." If you suffer for doing good. I think this is important. If you want to suffer well, you have to understand what good suffering means. Let me clarify. What Jesus is not talking about, what Peter is not talking about, is the suffering that I endured wearing Sperry's to the Buffalo Chip. Like, that's on me. That's my decision. God's not involved in that. I just have to deal with that. I think the best way to describe the good suffering that Peter talks about is this: if the life that you're living, trying to pursue Jesus, trying to look like Jesus, trying to be with Jesus, if that life causes other people to look at you differently, causes other people to say things about you, causes you to lose things that you maybe thought you were having, that's good suffering. When because of your decision to look more like Jesus, things are harder for you, that's what Peter is talking about. That's what good suffering looks like. So, me wearing Sperry's to the Buffalo Chip, not good suffering. You, like a freshman dude, doing a backflip to like impress a girl, break your leg, not good suffering. But if you do it at church and she's a church girl, still not good suffering. Like, you're still down, that doesn't count. It's like, she's a Christian though, I think. You're an idiot. I think the best way to think about what good suffering could look like would be to go back these last couple weeks. The first week of this series, we talked about when in Rome, pursue holiness, chase holiness, spend time with Jesus. Maybe you received some suffering like this. Maybe for you, you no longer can go places on Saturday night because you've chosen to invest in serving in our 7th and 8th grade ministry. And you sometimes have to say no to other things. Maybe you're someone that, because you value so much the time spent in Scripture, you plug your phone in downstairs at like 9:30 and everybody's like, "What? I'm trying to snap you." But you're willing to go to bed on time so you can get up 30 minutes early and spend time with Jesus. You might get some pushback for that. There might be some of you in your pursuit of holiness that choose this summer to go to camp or choose to go on a mission trip overseas. Because of that, you have to say no to a sport camp or a job interview or something along those lines. Like, you're choosing to take on some suffering because you're willing to pursue Jesus. Something that Peter talks about a lot in the verses right before this is the idea of submitting to authority. I think sometimes the suffering that those of us that follow Jesus might take upon ourselves is if in our willingness to submit to our coaches, our parents, our teachers, our employers. And when everybody around you looks at you and says, "Man, that's stupid. Why would you respect that person? They don't deserve it." Like you're getting made fun of because you're choosing to look like Jesus. Last week, Dustin talked about standing out. I like this idea of moral authority. Moral authority is like living a life with such incredible character and integrity that people look at your life and it's different. You might get some pushback from this. There might be some good suffering involved here. When you decide to be someone that plays Call of Duty and like changes the way you speak so you don't sound like the 7-year-old kid who's just crushing you. You want so badly to just give them a piece of your mind. But you want to treat people differently. Maybe your refusal to be involved in just like the mess that is the group chat without the one kid you're talking trash about. Your willingness to avoid that. You might get made fun of. You might be pointed out as someone who's not being involved in the gossip. That's good suffering. Maybe for those of you that have followed Jesus, you've decided to make some strong decisions with who you date. Maybe you made a decision to, you want to pursue a life such that when you get married, you're still a virgin. And that's a wild concept in today's world. And people will look at you and make fun of you. And maybe some of you can go to the next step, like, I don't want to just be a virgin, I want to be someone that doesn't even watch pornography. Man, that's not normal today. I bet you take some heat for that. That would be good suffering. If we want to suffer well, we have to endure endure the suffering and understand what it actually means. We have to understand it, understand what good suffering is. This is a little sidebar here. This is not connected to anything, but this has been convicting me a little bit. As someone who follows Jesus, I listed a bunch of ways that potentially your pursuit of Jesus could cause you to receive some suffering. I would just challenge you. If I listed all those things and you don't feel like you're receiving any suffering, I just wonder if you're as boldly following Jesus as you say you are. If your life is cake and no one calls you out for being different, I'm just not convinced that you're pursuing Jesus the way that you say you are. If you want to suffer well, understand it. Second thing you need to do is you need to embrace it. I obviously did not embrace this. As soon as I showed up with Sperry's, I just ran and hid. I was embarrassed. I couldn't handle it. It is crazy though how your mindset can instantly shift if you change your perspective on something. Peter goes on to say this. This is I'm just going to read this verse we already read again. For it is commendable if someone bears up under the pain of unjust suffering. Commendable. It should be noticed. You should be encouraged if you're someone that does this. In college, we had football practices at 4:30 in the morning. There were workouts, and there's nothing awesome about a 4:30 workout. It sucks, always. It's never great. But I remember I used to complain about it all the time. I hated it. I was mad. I was frustrated every single time I showed up. And something shifted for me sophomore to junior year, where it's like, I'm here anyways. I'm not skipping the workout. I'm showing up at 4:30, and I'm just sandbagging it through the whole thing. What's the point? And there was a shift of the playlist in my mind of hey, you're here, why don't you just work hard? You're here, why don't you just get the most out of this? And the shift from being a woe is me, this is awful, to embracing it badge of honor. Of course I'm here at 4:30. Of course I'm working harder than everybody else. Changed my trajectory as a college football player. It changed the way I was viewed by my coaches. It changed the way I was viewed by my teammates. It changed the way that I was viewed in light of our conference awards and the way that I could lead our team, simply because I shifted from being a complainer to being someone that just embraced it. Can I own this? It's a badge of honor to suffer a little bit for the kingdom of heaven. How cool would it be if you get kicked out of the group chat and you're just of course I did, because I don't talk like they do. Badge of honor. How cool would it be if you don't get invited to that thing that you know you shouldn't be invited to? It's on a Saturday night. Well, of course, they finally stopped asking me. They know what my priorities are. They know that every Sunday night I'm here. I value this place. They stopped asking. James says this, I love this in the book of James. It says this right here. Also, in our sufferings, we persist in our sufferings because we know that suffering produces perseverance. Perseverance produces character, and character then produces hope. I'm just curious if we were students that persisted in the suffering and we looked forward to the hope that we had. I think about the students across the valley that are choosing to live a life that's sexually aligned with what Jesus would call us to. And you're gonna consistently get made fun of and called out to be different. But what if instead of just being drowned in all of those complaints and all those words and all those mean things people were said, what if you lived in the hope of knowing that when you get to your marriage, you and your spouse, that first night, your conversation gets to be not about all the other times, all the other people you've been intimate with, not about all the other things you've watched. Let me tell you, that conversation is gonna be hard. That conversation is gonna rob you of a future that is good. And what if you were just willing to embrace the suffering that comes by living a life running after Jesus? It's a badge of honor. It's worth pursuing. Embrace it. Third thing is this, and to be honest, I'm the worst at this. It's this idea if we want to suffer well, we have to endure it. I'm not great at enduring. Keep bringing up these stupid Sperry's, but I'm gonna be honest. The next week, I wore those Sperry's. I was a school teacher, I was a 6th grade school teacher. And I was like, I'm gonna give him another go. Come on, Boatman. I'm gonna give him another go. And I wore these Sperry's to school, and I taught 6th grade. And this 6th grade kid, 6th graders are the worst, man. There's the stones on this kid. He walks right up to me, and he looks at me, he's like, Mr. Hancock, why are you wearing poor people's shoes? And I'm like, oh! Just crushed. Just crushed. And I threw them away. I was like, I can't wear these anymore. I cannot endure this suffering. I cannot fight through this. I'm not strong enough to do it. Zero grit was shown by Jake in this moment. Peter calls us to endure it. To this you were called because Christ suffered for you, leaving an example that you should follow in his steps. You wanna know why you should endure suffering? Jesus endured suffering. Jesus didn't just live this out right at the end. He preached this constantly. This is in Matthew. He says this, but I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them your other cheek also. He preached this in life, and as Peter writes later in 1 Peter, he actually lived this in death. 1 Peter 2:23 says this, when they hurled their insults at him, he did not retaliate. When he suffered, he made no threats. That's a tough pill for me to swallow. Because I love a good revenge story. I love a good instant karma TikTok. I want to win. I want to get even. I want to get them back for the way that they treated me. And Paul and Jesus are pretty clear that if you want to endure suffering, you have to resist and refuse your right to retaliate. Just give it up. I think what's fascinating about a life that rejects retaliation is it oftentimes is a life that most points people to Jesus. In ancient Rome, Nero was the leader. And he hated Christians. And it wasn't just I don't like those guys. No, I'm gonna eradicate them from the face of the world. Christianity was an upstart religion at the time. It hadn't caught fire yet. It was a group of people pursuing Jesus, this guy named Jesus. And Nero saw that it was gonna potentially cause problems for him as a ruler. So he chose to start eradicating Christians. And it wasn't just putting them in jail, he was murdering them. He would find them and he would say, hey, do you still profess to be a follower of Jesus? And if they said yes, he would murder them. One of the ways he did it often was he had these big gardens, and he put all these Christians on stakes in these gardens. In the middle of the night, he'd cover them with tar and he'd light them on fire. So the whole city would see that these people say they follow Jesus. And Nero was convinced that by putting these Christians through intense suffering, he would weed them out. Two of the probably biggest high-profile martyrs that happened was Paul. Paul's a dude that wrote most of the New Testament. Nero beheaded that guy. And Peter, the Peter who wrote this book that we're reading, was killed. He was crucified, just like Jesus, but he didn't want to be like Jesus, so he asked that they crucify him upside down. And Nero was convinced that in light of all this unjust suffering, in light of all this pain and destruction that he was bringing upon the Christians, he was convinced that Christianity was going to just give up. It was going to stop. But because of the way that those two dudes and hundreds of other Christians suffered well, Christianity today is more popular than it ever could have been. There are more people following Jesus today than any other religion in the world. And it's because dudes like Peter decided to stop solving everything on their own and to let Jesus work through them. I think potentially as Christ followers, the best thing that we can do to move Christianity forward, the best thing that we can do to show that we are changed because Jesus lives within us, is to be Christ followers that suffer well, that understand what good suffering looks like, that embrace it as a badge of honor and endure through it without retaliating, without pushing back, and to just let Jesus shine, not us. And if we want to make a difference as Christ-centered difference makers, let's be students that when we're in Rome, we suffer well. Let me pray for us. Hey, Father, I'm consistently poor at this. Man, it's convicting for me because I've been just trying to process my life, and I'm just not sure that I have that many opportunities to suffer. And I wonder, for me personally, if I'm just not boldly following Jesus as much as I think I am. Help me personally be someone that can impact my neighbors across the street, my next door neighbors. Help us to be students that can boldly pursue Jesus in a world that doesn't want us, in our schools, maybe our houses, on our teams. Lord, the best way for us to make a difference in this world is to be students that endure, that show grit, and that suffer well. We love you, Jesus, in your name. Amen.